Our first presenters today are Alison Poe and Marice Rose. Marice Rose is Associate Professor of Art History and Visual Culture at Fairfield University in Connecticut, where she also chairs the Visual and Performing Arts Department. Her research interests are art and gender in late Roman domestic contexts, classical reception and art history pedagogy. With presenter Alison Poe, she edited the collected volume Receptions of Antiquity, Constructions of Gender in European Art, 1300 to 1600. She also co-curated an exhibition called Hair in the Classical World at the Fairfield University Art Museum, which comprised artworks and hair implements from the 6th century BCE to late antiquity from Greece, Cyprus, and the Roman Empire. As I mentioned, Alison Poe was Marice's co-editor for the 2016 Brill Metaforms volume, Receptions of Antiquity, Constructions of Gender in European Art from 1300 to 1600. Her most recent publication is Eva Hesse's Laocoon, Mitigated Antiquity and Spectres in Space, co-authored with modernist Elitza Edelman for the 2020 Women's Art Journal. Alison focuses on classical reception in 20th and 21st century art and popular culture, including fashion and children's book illustrations. She also works on late antique iconography. And today they are presenting together a paper entitled Classicizing Goth, Nick Knight's S.W.A.L.K 2020 and John Galliano's Wet Look for Maison Margiela.
Thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you, yes.
Can we see it?
Yes.
Great, okay. Scholarly explorations of classical reception in 20th and 21st century haute couture are rare. Exceptions include 2 exhibitions at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Goddess, focused on modern fashion inspired by ancient Greece, and Heavenly Bodies, considered the influence of early Christian and Byzantine dress, in addition to its main focus on the impact of later medieval costume. An exhibit at the National Gallery of Victoria in Melbourne examined the drapery of Greek and Roman sculpture as inspiration for European and American fashion since the 19th century. Despite such curatorial and public interest, there are few peer-reviewed publications on the topic. Recent work by classicist Stacy Rauchi is notable. In an article published this year, she discusses fashion shows' reimagining of ancient spaces and provides a useful chart of recent high fashion references to Greek and Roman antiquity. We hope that our paper will contribute to the national discourse and bring academic attention to the creative and compelling work taking shape in ateliers today. This evening, we will look at John Galliano's couture designs for the fashion house Maison Margiela, specifically the Fall and Winter 2020 collection and its wet look draping effect as highlighted in the film S.W.A.L.K by director Nick Knight. We consider the look and the film's relationship to classicism and to Goth culture and potential viewer receptions.
Marice, are you seeing the slides? I'm only seeing you.
I'm seeing the slides.
Oh dear, I'm sorry, Dan. I'm only seeing my face and Marice's. Is it possible that I should be doing something different?
Let me unspotlight you both for now, and then hopefully that will fix the problem.
Yeah. I'd like to see the screen share.
Dan, were you seeing my slides?
I'm seeing your slides. I think we all
are. Okay,
good. Does that help?
Yes,
okay.
We're seeing the slides out here.
Okay, well, there we go.
Now I see you, Dan. It must just be me. I can live without the slides. Marice knows when to.
Yeah, I'll cue it.
All right, so I'll go ahead. S.W.A.L.K was released on YouTube in July and has already been viewed more than 120,000 times. The 52-minute film features documentary footage of the Maison Margiela atelier in Paris, helmed by creative director John Galliano, at work on its autumn-winter 2020 couture collection, which is called Artisanal. Interspersed with this documentary footage are scenes of models displaying the finished looks. Galliano conceived of S.W.A.L.K, which is short for Sealed with a Loving Kiss, as a replacement for the annual summer runway show, canceled this year because of the COVID pandemic. Galliano turned to longtime collaborator and fashion filmmaking pioneer Nick Knight to direct it. Characterizing night's cinematography in S.W.A.L.K is the use of a thermal camera for numerous scenes, as well as the frequent altering of the film's color palette, as seen in the still on the lower right. The looks composing the collection take on nomenclature from ancient mythology, mostly Greek deities and personifications. These names cue the viewer to the classicizing aspects of the designs themselves, most notably Galliano's drapery style, which he terms the wet look in an early title card and repeatedly throughout. The fabrics are modern, as are the cutting techniques, but Galliano's dresses do conjure, as New York Times fashion critic Vanessa Friedman puts it, the fragile drapery of Greek statuary. The dresses cling to the models' bodies and cascade to the floor in closely spaced, irregular folds. In the three looks that I hope are shown here, the knife-shaped folds and zigzag hems find widespread parallels in ancient sculpture, such as this statue recently excavated at Herculaneum. Most of Galliano's wet look dresses are white or near white, and although remains of pigment on many marble statues, including this one, indicate that they were originally painted, popular culture still mostly envisions these sculptures as white, a point classicist Sarah Bond has recently discussed and now was also mentioned in this afternoon's roundtable. In the dress shown here, the sleeveless bodice that drapes across the chest at least vaguely evokes the Greek peplos, and the long strip of fabric around the model's arm, like the loose pieces of drapery that flutter from other looks, calls to mind the ancient woman's himation, or pallium, the mantle worn over the dress. More generally, the diaphanous clinging drapery of Galliano's wet look recalls the sculpture of the high classical Athenian Acropolis by Phidias and his workshop, as well as later works in a similar style. So we're showing one of the parapet reliefs from the Acropolis of two Nikes wearing this style of drapery. The poses and settings of the models in S.W.A.L.K sometimes also bring ancient art to mind. The drapery that billows above a model's head evokes the classical iconography of celestial and wind goddesses. The placement of models on a spotlit pedestal, such as the figure in a classical contrapposto stance on the lower right, likens them to ancient statues as displayed in museums. Several reviews of S.W.A.L.K do mention the influence of ancient drapery styles in statuary. Galliano himself said in an interview that he took inspiration from, quote, images of goddesses and gods too, unquote, and he describes his models as celestial bodies that draw the mind to many areas of mythology. As Marice will now elucidate, Galliano's references are not only to antiquity per se, but also to intermediary classical receptions.
The documentary presents Galliano's placement of wet look drapery over models' entire faces as being inspired by a type of statue that features the effect of sculpted sheer veils covering the face. In the modern period, the effect was first used by sculptors in 18th century Naples for subjects like Christ and Mary, Vestal Virgins, and allegorical figures. By the 19th century, the execution of this look became a way for sculptors to demonstrate their virtuosity in carving, and the public flocked to see statues with carved transparent veils exhibited at venues like the Crystal Palace. In a print interview, Galliano mentions the influence of sculptors Antonio Corradini and Raffaele Monte. Photographs of their work are featured in the film on the vision board behind Galliano's head in this still, and that's the statue on the right, and in shots from the film that juxtapose the inspiring statue with the clothes. This is the full statue on the right of the still on the left. Night includes footage of Galliano demanding an assistant bring him the specific photo of the Corradini modesty statue, and then matching drapery on a model to it. In the 1986 runway show, Galliano used water to make fabric cling to the models' bodies. In S.W.A.L.K, he proudly describes how for his new collection, he figured out how to create the effect without water. He discusses his own innovation of a tailoring technique called circular cutting in a 2-minute segment with its own heading, and Knight spends 4 minutes on fabric's cutting and careful arrangement on the models. This is a significant amount of time in a film that is less than an hour long. Like the sculptors, Knight and Galliano are showcasing the virtuosity needed to achieve a wet drapery look. Galliano considers himself an artist, and a good one. Knight captures him saying the purpose of couture versus ready-to-wear is to show what we're capable of, and mentions these fab things that people don't know that I do. Now they know. Another point of connection between these 18th and 19th century statues and Galliano's models is that the clinging drapery is part of a romantic impression. Monti and the other sculptors working in this mode were not traditionally neoclassical in their choices of subjects or styles. Historian Gabriel Williams discusses Monti's sculptures as stoking romantic fantasy. For example, Monti's interest in different states of consciousness, in the sleep of sorrow and the dream of joy, and its open composition, are not typically neoclassical. Both this sculpture and Giuseppe Sammartino's androgynously sensual Christ are in the same romantic vein as Fuseli's Nightmare, among others, and correspond to the dreamy sensuality in some of the scenes in S.W.A.L.K. At one point in the film, the music changes from European classical to Middle Eastern, and the veiled models begin dancing in a corresponding style. The movement and costume are akin to this Hellenistic Greek statuette, but also to romantic fantasies of the Islamic world. In another Monti sculpture that looks like Galliano's designs, we see the veil and drapery are used toward an Orientalist sensuality that also echoes romantic paintings of harem women. Alison?
Thanks. These congruences between neoclassical drapery and the romantic movement that Marice has pointed out, and these two phenomena are often cast as opposites. These congruences provide context for the coexistence in S.W.A.L.K of references to antiquity with another cultural framework that might at first seem at odds with the classical, and that is Goth. Fashion historian Valerie Steele observes that Galliano's designs and shows frequently exhibit a Goth aesthetic. His AW20 artisanal collection is heavily Goth, Marice and I argue, both in its celebration of S.W.A.L.K and in its fusion of androgyny with eroticism. Knight's cinematography, furthermore, creates an atmosphere tinged with horror and the macabre, hallmarks of the Gothic and of Goth. Galliano explicitly links his AW20 artisanal designs to the Blitz Kids, a style tribe in late 1970s and early 80s London that regularly mingled with early Goths and shared not only their countercultural ethos, but also many aesthetic preferences. Some Blitz Kids and Goths, for example, assumed the theatrical maquillage of David Bowie's earlier alter ego, Ziggy Stardust. Scholars David Shumway and Heather Arnett have argued that Bowie helped shape what they call the dress-up dimension of Goth culture generally. In S.W.A.L.K, makeup artist Pat McGrath's creations strongly evoke Ziggy Stardust, and the film's soundtrack concludes with Bowie's Young Americans. Galliano also pays homage to the Blitz Kids' reuse and restyling of vintage garments and costumes. Torn-up thrift store jackets form the centerpieces of several AW20 looks, which bear close affinities to Goth and punk styles, as exemplified here by Johnny Slut's Goth ensemble. These looks are Goth in being visibly ripped up and strongly sexualizing, both in what they expose and in how they cover up the rest. AW20 artisanal shares with many strains of Goth not only a strong sexual charge, but also the queering of gender norms. Galliano describes the artisanal line as co-ed and genderless, and he observes in the film, quote, "I fit dresses on Anton. He's a boy." Some male-identifying Goths did and still do wear traditional women's items, often to highly androgynous effect, as on this cover of the Goth magazine Propaganda. Director Knight imparts onto the film as a whole a Gothic sensibility in accord with the Goth the Goth taste for the gloom and terror of Gothic literature, art, and film. Twice in S.W.A.L.K, the audience hears Galliano declare, "There can't be any poetry without death," an aphorism he attributes to Gothic poet and filmmaker Jean Cocteau. These words echo over a black and red scene shown in two stills here, in which a model in aura enacts a desperate escape attempt from a smoky room with no doors. For this scene, Knight uses a gray palette to present a draped and veiled model as a ghostly apparition amid fog that again amplifies the eeriness. A text chat has Galliano and collaborators musing that spirits haunt the Maison Margiela building and the clothes to be freed by stylist Kenji's scissors so they can, quote, enact revenge for how they died. Throughout the film, references recur to vampires, decay, haunting, and death. How does one reconcile these Goth traits with the film's classical receptions? A major aim of Marice's and my project is to answer this question. The very name Goth conjures the destruction of the classical heritage, not only in the minds of classical department members, but also in popular culture, as illustrated by this cartoon where ancient Romans prefer the capital G Goths to their lowercase g Goth girlfriends. Goth culture much more overtly aligns itself with the Middle Ages, often featuring medieval religious motifs, as in this 2006 look by John Galliano for Christian Dior, and on this recent cover of Gothic Beauty magazine, which calls to mind medieval crowned reliquary busts. Goth is also transgressive. Its taste for horror flirts with abjection in Julia Kristeva's definition as a terrifying encounter with pollution that threatens not only the body, but also the social order. For the most part, Goth's fashion codes and music challenge mainstream popular culture, but the movement certainly seems far distant from the rarefied institutional authority of classics. Marice and I contend, however, that S.W.A.L.K draws upon aspects of antiquity that resonate with Goth style. Specifically, Galliano's drapery styles reflect qualities in the corpus of ancient sculpture and in its rediscovery and display that appeal to a Goth ethos. One such quality is the fragmentary state of this corpus. Decapitated and dismembered statues embody decay and destruction, eliciting associations with Gothic literature and horror films. In S.W.A.L.K, Knight's camera sometimes makes the models look like fragments, zooming in until the figures consist only of draped torsos. Other body parts disappear as a result of Knight's color effects or amidst clouds of fog. Galliano's tearing up of old garments, a la the Blitz Kids, also reflects an appreciation for fragments, and especially for fragments' receptivity to creative reassembly. Galliano's whole approach to his source material, in fact, reflects this sensibility. His synthesis of ancient, neoclassical, romantic, Gothic, and other reference harmonizes on the one hand with what Schumacher and Arnett call, quote, Goth's bricolage of fashion trends and periods, unquote. But it also finds parallels in the quotation of ancient sculptures by early modern artists, such as Michelangelo and Titian. And Leonard Barkin attributes these early modern adaptations in part to the enticingly incomplete state of these antiquities. Galliano, we argue, operates analogously, creating a pastiche partly based on ancient fragments. Classicizing drapery styles do play a role in Gothic imagery, where they are typically worn by victims who are pure but alluring. The model in S.W.A.L.K wearing aura in the escape attempt scene may bear associations of this sort. And ragged drapery can also be the attire of ghosts, as we've noted for the model on the right. Galliano's main use of his classicizing wet look, however, is to exalt the sensuality of the body, an intent very much in keeping with the aesthetics of ancient Phidian drapery, such as the ketones of these iconic three goddesses from the Parthenon East pediment. Goth styles too often highlight the body's allure, albeit usually through structured garments such as corsets. Classical sculpture can also be androgynous or even intersexual, such as the famous sleeping hermaphrodite statue type, as well as the standing hermaphrodite figures, where drapery slips down the body to reveal male genitalia. As scholars Genevieve Gessert and Timothy Smith have recently shown, the androgyny of some ancient works prompted confusion among antiquarians of later eras. In AW20 artisanal, then, the blurring of genders finds precedence not only in the queer strains of Goth culture, but also in the history of ancient art. Classicizing drapery and Goth thus intersect in S.W.A.L.K in the appreciation for fragments, in references to Romantic and Gothic uses of drapery, in the celebration of the human body, and in the mutability of gender signifiers. When Galliano works at the nexus of these two conventionally regarded opposites, he does so, Marice and I propose, as another deliberate act of virtuosity. Achieving this mix of ostensibly high and low culture demonstrates that the designer, and also arguably his collaborator, Nick Knight, possesses both classical erudition and iconoclastic coolness, together with the artistry to combine the two. Such bravura is eminently suitable for an avant-garde couture house like Maison Margiela. Yes.
And thank you very much.
Thank you.